Once the conflict between Israel and Iran began, the first thing that changed was oil. Prices went up fast, and they're still rising. The Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway where 20% of the world's oil passes through, is now at risk. If that strait gets blocked, even for a short time, oil prices could shoot up even higher. The reason why this is so important and frustrating for Trump is that for the past 5 months, the US economy has had a lucky break. Oil prices were going down. That helped slow down inflation. Because of that, the Trump administration got a lot of praise for the strong economy. People were spending more, prices felt better, and things looked calm. But that calm is now over. Now the US is faced with the economic consequences of the conflict, because when oil prices go up, everything else gets more expensive. That's because oil affects the cost of almost everything: transportation, food, flights, goods, and factory production. It's a major part of the inflation formula. So when oil jumps, the US Consumer Price Index, CPI, the main way we measure inflation, will rise too. So if you thought inflation was gone, think again. It's coming back, and fast, and right before the election season. Meanwhile, Europe may be in even more danger. If the Strait of Hormuz is fully blocked, Europe could lose a major source of its energy, and that could push its economy into crisis. And this may just be the beginning. Before we continue, subscribe now, because what happens next could shake the entire world economy. Tap the bell. And let's get right into it. The Strait of Hormuz may look like just a sliver of blue on a map, only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. But don't let its size fool you. This tiny waterway is one of the most important lifelines of the global economy, especially when it comes to oil. It is located between Iran to the north and the United Arab Emirates and Oman to the south. This strait is the only sea route in and out of the Persian Gulf. That means every oil tanker carrying crude from major producers like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, and the UAE has to pass through it to reach the rest of the world. If anything were to block this channel, even for a few days, the impact would ripple far beyond the Middle East. For Americans, this isn't some faraway foreign issue. It would hit home fast through soaring gas prices, higher airline fares, and a spike in shipping costs that could drive up the price of food and everyday goods. In today's tightly connected world, a crisis in the Strait of Hormuz can trigger inflation, market panic, and economic slowdown right here in the US. And in this fragile global moment, that risk is becoming harder to ignore. According to US government data, about 20 million barrels of oil pass through the strait every single day. That's around 20% of the world's oil supply. These shipments are not optional. They're critical for keeping factories running, planes flying, and homes warm. Any minor threat in the strait can make oil prices shoot up by 10 or 15% overnight. That means gas at the pump gets more expensive. Grocery stores, airlines, and manufacturers feel the heat too. Suddenly, your monthly budget looks very different. And when energy prices jump, everything else follows. Inflation goes up, central banks raise interest rates, and politicians face angry voters. A strong economy starts to look shaky, and it all begins with a few oil tankers stuck in a narrow sea lane. This may sound extreme, but it has happened before. And it could happen again. Even though the US produces a lot of oil, it still relies heavily on imports, and domestic energy prices are tied to the global market. So if the Strait of Hormuz gets blocked, Americans will feel it too. US companies would face higher costs for shipping, fuel, and raw materials. That makes American products more expensive, hurting manufacturing and slowing the economy. Investors might start pulling out and looking elsewhere. The US economy might seem strong on the surface, powered by tech, finance, and retail, but oil remains its foundation. This brings us to Donald Trump. From the moment he returned to the White House in January, Trump made cheap oil a top priority. He pressured OPEC and urged Saudi Arabia to boost production to keep prices low. For a while, it worked. Inflation eased, people paid less at the pump, and Trump pointed to it as proof that his economic plan was working. But now, with the Middle East on fire, that plan is unraveling. Trump didn't expect this level of disruption. Rising oil prices and growing threats to supply chains are putting his economic track record at risk. The backbone of his confidence, low energy costs, is cracking. Behind the scenes, Trump's team is scrambling. They're urging Israel to de-escalate and sending messages to Iran through third parties. The urgency isn't about diplomacy. It's about saving the US economy. All the progress of the past year could vanish overnight. Oil prices jumped 7% immediately after the conflict began, while stocks tumbled. Trump bet everything on cheap oil. He assumed it would keep inflation low and the economy steady. But that gamble has backfired. With the Strait of Hormuz at risk and war on the horizon, the system is starting to shake. If prices keep rising, the US could slide into recession. Inflation would surge, and the Federal Reserve might have to raise interest rates again, just when Americans are already burdened with debt. According to JP Morgan, oil at $130 would likely double US CPI inflation to around 5%. What once looked like a strong economy now feels dangerously fragile. And this might only be the beginning. If the strait is fully shut down, oil could soar past $150 a barrel. The question now is simple, but terrifying. Can Trump pull the country out of a mess he never saw coming? Or has he finally run out of luck? Let's shift our focus back to the Strait of Hormuz. The strait has two narrow lanes, one for ships going in and one for ships coming out. Each lane is only 2 miles wide. Between them is a small buffer zone. Every day, around 100 massive oil tankers pass through these lanes, carrying billions of dollars worth of fuel. Because the space is so tight, even a small disruption can cause a major problem. Imagine if one ship is attacked, or a mine is dropped, or a drone flies overhead. That's enough to scare companies, raise insurance rates, and throw global markets into chaos. And that's without a full-blown war, just the threat of one. Iran, in particular, knows this, and over the years, they've sent warnings. Sometimes direct, sometimes through military drills or political statements. Even the suggestion of closing the strait makes oil prices jump. That's how powerful this choke point is. This is why freight ships are preparing for the outcomes of this fight. Back in the 1980s, during the Iran-Iraq War, both sides attacked oil tankers. This period became known as the Tanker War. It caused major delays, price spikes, and panic in oil markets. The US had to escort its ships through the region with military force. More recently, in 2019, several oil ships were damaged near the strait. No one really knew who was behind it, but it didn't matter. The fear alone was enough to send oil prices up and create tension between Iran and the West. The message was clear that this isn't just a theory. It's a real danger. Markets don't wait for bombs to fall. Just one headline can trigger a crisis. So what happens if a full closure really takes place? Iran has the tools to block the strait if it wants to. It has fast boats, sea mines, missiles, and drones. It also controls the coastline. If it made the decision to shut things down, it wouldn't take long. Even just creating enough fear could stop oil companies from sending their tankers through. But there's a catch. Doing so would likely trigger a military response. The US Navy has a base nearby in Bahrain and could quickly respond. Other countries like the UK and France would also step in. So Iran has to weigh its options carefully. How much it wants to disrupt the world versus the risk of war. The most alarming part is that the world doesn't need an actual blockade for panic to begin. One provocative statement, a close encounter between ships, or a drone flying in the wrong zone, and markets instantly freeze, bracing for an oil crisis. The Federal Reserve was getting ready to cut interest rates. Inflation had been coming down slowly, wages were calming, and markets were hopeful that cheaper borrowing was just around the corner. But all of that changed in an instant. Israel attacked Iran, and suddenly, what looked like a smooth road ahead turned into a dangerous path. This war may now force the Fed to pause or even cancel those expected rate cuts, just when Americans were starting to feel some relief. Oil is tied to almost everything. It powers trucks that deliver goods. It fuels planes, heats homes, and runs factories. If oil prices stay high, companies will raise prices to cover their costs. That means inflation. Inflation, the very thing the Fed was trying to fix, could come roaring back. Just a few weeks ago, inflation looked like it was cooling. Now it's at risk of rising again. This puts the Federal Reserve in a tough spot. Chair Jerome Powell had said any changes to interest rates would depend on economic data. The markets thought this meant cuts were coming soon. But now the data may change because of this war. Bond markets are already reacting. Interest on 2-year Treasury bonds is rising. This means investors are betting that the Fed will not cut rates as soon as they thought. The stock market is falling fast. The Dow Jones dropped nearly 800 points in one day. People are putting their money into safer places, like gold. This is a warning sign. Fear is spreading. If the Strait were to be blocked, even for a short time, global oil prices would skyrocket overnight, and the fallout wouldn't stay confined to the Middle East. Any disruption in the Persian Gulf would send shockwaves through energy markets worldwide. Even countries with no direct oil imports from the Gulf, like much of Europe and Asia, would still feel the impact. Here's the harsh reality. There's no alternative sea route around the Strait of Hormuz, no backup plan, no detour. So, while closing the strait might be militarily feasible, the economic and diplomatic backlash might outweigh the benefits. This may explain why, as of now, no action has been taken, and discussions remain mostly rhetorical, though no less dangerous. Could this be a warning shot across the bow rather than a declaration of war? Traditionally, wars trigger a flight to the US dollar. Not this time. Despite some rebound, the USD rose only 0.5%, far less than expected. According to ING, the greenback should have surged post-attack, but markets sense the bad state of the US economy. Also, gold prices surged past $3,400 per ounce, gaining more than 1% in a day, and could soon hit $4,000, according to Bank of America. The message from investors is loud. Money is fleeing fiat. With war-fueled deficits, rising rates, and inflation pressures, gold is once again emerging as the de facto reserve asset. Stunningly, gold now makes up 20% of official global reserves, overtaking the euro. The US dollar still holds the top spot at 46%, but that lead is slipping fast. If Iran's nuclear sites are already on the target list, what's stopping oil terminals from being next? A single strike could plunge the world into a full-blown energy crisis. And in that chaos, gold isn't just rising. It's becoming the new safe haven. The calm is over. The cracks in the global economy are widening. And this may only be the beginning. We'll keep bringing you the latest as the situation unfolds. So make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.